The bitter taste lingered on my tongue as I forced the last sip of chamomile tea down. Johnson stood behind me, his hands massaging my shoulders with the same gentle touch that once made me feel safe. But tonight, something felt different. Wrong. Feeling sleepy yet, darling? His voice carried an unfamiliar edge, barely masked by his usual affectionate tone. I nodded slowly, letting my eyelids grow heavy. The tea is really helping. My words slurred just enough to sound convincing. Through half-closed eyes, I saw him glance at his watch, 11:47 p.m. His fingers drummed nervously on the kitchen counter, an energy I hadn't seen from him before. After 12 years of marriage, I knew all of Johnson's habits. This wasn't one of them. "Why don't you head upstairs, honey? I'll clean up down here." I deliberately stumbled, catching myself on the doorframe. Good idea. I can barely keep my eyes open. But as I climbed the familiar stairs to our bedroom, my mind remained sharp and clear. Because 20 minutes earlier, when Johnson wasn't looking, I had poured the entire cup of tea into the potted plant by the window and now, lying in bed with my breathing slow and steady, I waited. The floorboards creaked below. A door opened. Footsteps approached. And what I would discover in the next hour would shatter everything I thought I knew about the man I had loved for over a decade. Before we continue, please leave a comment below telling us which country you're watching from. We love to know where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on the channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more incredible tales of life and revenge. Enjoy listening. My name is Wendy Aiden, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I was living the perfect life. I met Johnson Lopez during my sophomore year at Northwestern University. He was everything I thought I wanted: tall, charming, with warm brown eyes that seemed to speak volumes. He studied architecture while I pursued journalism, and we spent countless hours in coffee shops dreaming of our future. One day, "I'll design our perfect house," he would say, sketching rough blueprints on napkins. "And you'll write stories that change the world." We married right after graduation. I was 22, naive, and so deeply in love that I couldn't imagine a life without him. Johnson secured a job at a prestigious firm in Chicago, while I freelanced for local magazines as we saved for the perfect house he had promised. But dreams often shift when reality sets in. Johnson's career soared. Within 5 years, he was promoted to senior architect, then partner. The money flowed in, and we moved to Riverside, an affluent suburb where manicured lawns stretched like green carpets, and everyone drove cars worth more than most people's annual salaries. I continued writing, but somewhere along the way, my articles shifted from investigative pieces on social justice to fluff pieces on home decor and local restaurant reviews. It wasn't what I had dreamed of, but Johnson was so proud when I got published in Chicago Suburban Living that I convinced myself it was enough. "You're amazing, Wendy," he'd say, pulling me close after reading my latest piece. My talented, beautiful wife. For years, this became our rhythm. Johnson worked long hours designing commercial buildings and luxury homes. I managed our social calendar, wrote my articles, and played the part of the perfect architect's wife at dinner parties and charity galas. We tried for children. Month after month, year after year, we waited for the positive test that never came. The doctors ran tests and suggested treatments, but nothing worked. Johnson handled the disappointment better than I did. "It's okay," he'd whisper when I cried after another failed attempt. "We have each other. That's enough." But was it enough for him? The question started to gnaw at me around our 10th anniversary when I noticed Johnson staying later at the office, taking more business trips, and spending hours on his phone with clients I'd never heard of. "The Hartwell project is massive," he'd explain when I asked about his schedule. "If we land this contract, we'll be set for life." I accepted his explanations because I trusted him. In 12 years of marriage, Johnson had never given me a reason to doubt him. He brought me flowers every Friday, remembered our anniversary, and still told me he loved me every single day. Until 3 weeks ago, when everything started to unravel, starting with the tea. For as long as I could remember, I had been a light sleeper. Even the neighbor's cat walking across our roof could wake me. But suddenly, I was sleeping like the dead every night. At first, I welcomed it. After years of tossing and turning, finally getting deep, uninterrupted sleep felt like a blessing. But then, I began noticing other things. I'd wake up completely disoriented, sometimes with my clothes disheveled or in positions different from when I had gone to bed. My mouth would be dry, my head foggy, and I'd feel exhausted despite sleeping 9 or 10 hours straight. "Maybe you should see Dr. Lewis," Johnson suggested when I mentioned feeling groggy. "You might have developed sleep apnea." But the symptoms only seemed to appear on the nights when Johnson made my bedtime tea, a habit he had started about a month earlier. "It's chamomile," he'd explained that first evening, presenting the steaming cup with a smile. "I read that it helps with stress and sleep quality. I thought it might help you relax." It was sweet, thoughtful even. Johnson had always been attentive, but this felt different. More calculated. The second crack appeared when I found the receipt. I was rummaging through Johnson's jacket pocket for his dry cleaning ticket when my fingers brushed against a small piece of paper. CVS Pharmacy. 3 items. Chamomile tea, honey, and something called Ambien CR. My blood ran cold. I knew that name. Ambien was a prescription sleep medication, strong enough to knock out an insomniac, and more than powerful enough to explain my recent sleeping patterns. But why would Johnson need sleeping pills? He'd never had trouble sleeping in all the years I'd known him. Unless they weren't for him. I stared at that receipt for what felt like hours, my hands trembling. There had to be an explanation. Maybe his doctor had prescribed them for occasional use. Maybe he was planning to try them himself and hadn't mentioned it yet. But deep in my gut, I knew better. The third crack became a chasm when I saw the phone. Johnson had always been careful with his phone, but not secretive. He'd leave it on counters, ask me to answer texts while he was driving. He never seemed concerned about privacy. But lately, he guarded that phone like it contained state secrets. He took it everywhere, the bathroom, the garage. When he was working on his car, even to the mailbox when it buzzed during dinner. He'd excuse himself to take an important call from the office. When I walked into the room while he was texting, he'd quickly close the screen and smile that charming smile. Work stuff, he'd say. You know how demanding clients can be. But one evening, while Johnson was in the shower, his phone rang from the bedroom dresser. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen. Scarlett. I'd never heard Johnson mention anyone named Scarlett, neither a client, nor a coworker, nor a friend, but someone important enough to rate a heart emoji in my husband's phone. The call went to voicemail. Then another call from Scarlett. Then a text message that made my stomach drop. Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll be wearing the red dress you bought me. My legs gave out. I sank onto our bed, the bed Johnson and I had shared for 12 years, and stared at that message until the screen went dark. A red dress he bought her. Tonight. It was Tuesday. Johnson had told me he was working late on the Hartwell project blueprints. The shower was still running. Steam poured from under the bathroom door. I had maybe 5 more minutes before Johnson came out, and I couldn't let him see me like this. I couldn't let him know that I knew. Not yet. I needed to think, to plan. And most importantly, I needed to understand exactly what was happening in my own marriage. That's when I decided to test my theory about the tea. The next evening, Johnson followed his new routine perfectly. How was your day, darling? He kissed my cheek as he walked into the kitchen, loosening his tie. Good. I finished that piece about the new farmer's market, I replied, keeping my voice steady and normal. How about you? Still working on the Hartwell project? Something flickered across his face so quickly that I might have imagined it. It's complex. I'll probably need to work late again tomorrow. Another lie. I was starting to recognize them now, the tiny tells I'd been blind to for weeks. The way his left eye twitched slightly when he said, work late. The way he touched his wedding ring when he mentioned the Hartwell project. That's okay, I said, smiling. I know how important this project is to you. At 11:30, like clockwork, Johnson appeared with my tea. Here you go, sweetheart. I made it extra strong tonight. You look tired. The cup was warm in my hands. The chamomile scent was soothing, familiar. If I didn't know better, it would have been the perfect gesture from a caring husband. Thank you. I raised the cup to my lips, pretending to take a sip while barely letting the liquid touch my mouth. Delicious. Johnson watched me carefully as I appeared to drink. Too carefully. Good, he said when I'd finished half the cup. The chamomile should help you sleep deeply tonight. Sleep deeply. The phrase sent chills down my spine. I continued my performance, taking fake sips while letting the tea dribble back into the cup when Johnson wasn't looking directly at me. When he went to the bathroom, I quickly poured the remaining tea into the kitchen sink and refilled the cup with plain water. Feeling sleepy yet? Johnson asked when he returned. I stretched and yawned dramatically. Actually, yes. That tea always works so fast. Why don't you head up to bed? I'll be up in a few minutes. Just need to review some blueprints. Blueprints? Right. I trudged upstairs, making my footsteps heavier than usual. In our bedroom, I changed into pajamas and slipped under the covers, then waited. My heart was pounding so loudly I feared Johnson would hear it, but I forced myself to breathe deeply and evenly. 20 minutes later, I heard his footsteps on the stairs. The bedroom door creaked open, and Johnson's shadow fell across the floor. Wendy, he whispered. Honey. I didn't respond, keeping my breathing steady and my body limp. He called my name again, louder this time. When I still didn't react, he approached the bed and gently shook my shoulder. Nothing. Satisfied that I was unconscious, Johnson moved quickly. I heard him gather clothes from his dresser, then retreat to the bathroom. 5 minutes later, he emerged wearing dark jeans and a button-down shirt, the one I'd bought him for our anniversary last year. He was dressing up for her. Johnson leaned over and kissed my forehead. "Sweet dreams, darling," he whispered. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. I waited until I heard his car pull out of the driveway before sitting up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn on the bedside lamp. He was gone. My husband of 12 years had drugged me, or thought he had, and was now driving across town to meet another woman. A woman named Scarlett, who wore red dresses he bought for her. But this was just the beginning. I needed to know more: who she was, how long this had been going on, and exactly what Johnson was planning. Because something told me this wasn't just about an affair. The next morning, Johnson was the picture of the devoted husband. He brought me coffee in bed, kissed my forehead, and asked how I'd slept. "Like a rock," I said, studying his face for any sign of guilt. "I don't remember anything after my head hit the pillow." Relief flickered in his eyes. "Good. You've been so stressed lately. You need the rest." Stressed? If only he knew. After Johnson left for work, I sprang into action. 12 years as a journalist had taught me how to investigate. Even if I had been writing fluff pieces lately, it was time to put those skills to better use. First, I called Johnson's office, Lopez Architecture. "This is Rebecca speaking." "Hi, Rebecca. This is Wendy Lopez. Is my husband in yet?" "Oh, hi, Mrs. Lopez. Actually, Mr. Lopez won't be in today. He's meeting with the Hartwell client at their site location. Should I take a message?" The Hartwell Project again. I was starting to hate that name. "No message, thank you." I hung up and immediately called Johnson's cell. "Hey, honey," he answered on the second ring. Background noise suggested he was in a car. "What's up?" "I just wanted to hear your voice." "Where are you?" "Driving to the Hartwell site. Big meeting today." Another lie delivered so smoothly that I might have believed it if I hadn't just called his office. "Hey, don't work too hard. Love you." "Love you too, Wendy." But did he? Could someone who truly loved you drug you every night so they could sneak out to see their lover? Next, I turned to social media. I'd never been one to stalk people online, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I started with Johnson's Facebook account. His posts were exactly what I'd expect: photos of us at dinner parties, architectural projects he was proud of, anniversary tributes that now felt like elaborate performances, but his tagged photos told a different story. 3 weeks ago, someone named Scarlett Vega had tagged Johnson in a photo at Millennium Park. They weren't touching, weren't even standing particularly close. But something about their body language screamed intimacy. The way she looked at him, the way he looked at her, it was a look I had seen on Johnson's face before, in our early dating photos. I clicked on Scarlett's profile. 28 years old. Stunning in that effortless way some women possess. Long dark hair, green eyes, and a smile that could sell anything. She worked as an interior designer, which made sense. Perhaps that's how she had met Johnson. But as I scrolled through her photos, my blood ran cold. Picture after picture showed Scarlett in restaurants. I recognized Morton's Steakhouse, where Johnson had taken me for our first anniversary. Ilainia, where we'd celebrated his promotion to partner. The rooftop bar at the Signature Room, our special place for important conversations. He was recreating our relationship with her, but the worst was yet to come. In a photo dated 2 weeks ago, Scarlett wore a familiar necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small diamond pendant. I recognized it because I had seen it before in my jewelry box, or rather, where it used to be. I'd noticed the necklace missing about a month ago and assumed I'd misplaced it. But now I knew. Johnson had stolen it. He had taken a piece of jewelry he had given me for our 5th anniversary and given it to his mistress. The violation felt like a physical blow. I spent the rest of the day piecing together their relationship timeline. Based on social media posts, restaurant check-ins, and tagged photos, Johnson and Scarlett had been seeing each other for at least 3 months, maybe longer. 3 months of lies. 3 months of working late, difficult clients, and Hartwell Project meetings. But the sleeping pills had only started a month ago, which meant something had changed. Something that required Johnson to ensure I was unconscious during his nighttime excursions. What was he planning that he couldn't risk me waking up for? I didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 nights later, I performed my sleeping pill charade again. This time, I was prepared. I had purchased a small recording device and hidden it in my jewelry box, which sat on the dresser across from our bed. If Johnson was going to continue violating our marriage in our bedroom, I wanted evidence. As before, Johnson waited until he was certain I was unconscious before getting dressed and leaving. But this time, I didn't just lie there waiting for him to return. I got up. Moving carefully in the dark, I dressed in black clothes and grabbed my car keys. If Johnson thought I was drugged and unconscious, he wouldn't be watching for me. This was my chance to see exactly what he was doing during these mysterious nights out. Following someone without being detected is harder than it looks in movies, but I had one advantage. I knew Johnson's habits better than anyone. He was methodical, predictable, and completely confident that his sleeping pill strategy was working. His car was easy to spot 3 blocks ahead of me. As we drove through downtown Chicago, he parked outside an upscale apartment building in River North. The kind of place that cost more per month than most people's mortgages. I parked across the street and watched as Johnson used a key card to enter the building. A key card. He had access. My heart pounded as the implications sank in. This wasn't just an affair conducted in hotels or her apartment. Johnson had some kind of official access to this building. But why? I waited for 45 minutes before Johnson emerged, but he wasn't alone. Scarlett walked beside him, and seeing them together in person was somehow worse than all the photos I'd found online. They moved like a couple, comfortable and familiar. She was laughing at something he'd said, and Johnson was looking at her the way he used to look at me. They got into Johnson's car and drove to an all-night diner I'd never heard of. Through the window, I watched them sit across from each other in a corner booth, having what appeared to be an intense conversation. Scarlett kept checking her phone and looking nervous. Johnson reached across the table to hold her hand, saying something that seemed to calm her down. Then he pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the table. Scarlett opened it, and her eyes widened. Even from across the street, I could see her surprise. She flipped through what looked like documents or photographs, then looked up at Johnson with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear? Excitement? Both? Johnson pulled out his phone and showed her something on the screen. Scarlett nodded, then leaned forward, as if memorizing whatever he was showing her. They talked for another hour before Johnson walked her back to her car. He kissed her goodbye, not a passionate kiss, but something more businesslike, professional. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just an affair. Johnson and Scarlett were planning something together, something that required documents, photographs, and careful coordination. Something that required me to be unconscious every night while they worked out the details. I followed Johnson home, arriving just minutes after him. By the time he crept back into our bedroom, I was back under the covers with my breathing deep and regular. "How's my sleeping beauty?" he whispered, not expecting an answer. But as he settled into bed beside me, I made a decision. I was done being passive, done being the victim in my own marriage. If Johnson wanted to play games, I could play them too. And I was going to win. The next morning, I called in sick to the magazine where I freelanced. "I think I'm coming down with something," I told my editor, Janet. "I need a few days to recover." It wasn't entirely a lie. I was sick. Sick of being deceived. Sick of being drugged. Sick of living a lie. But more than that, I was angry. Johnson left for work with his usual kiss and, "Have a good day, darling." I watched from the window as his car disappeared around the corner, then got to work. First, I searched our home office. Johnson was organized to a fault, but he was also careless in the way that guilty people often are. Hidden in the back of his desk drawer, underneath old tax returns, I found a second phone. A burner phone. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the messages. Months of correspondence between Johnson and Scarlett, but not the kind of romantic messages you'd expect from an affair. "Johnson, the policy is worth $2.3 million. More than enough for both of us." Scarlett, "When?" Johnson, "Soon. Everything has to look natural." Scarlett, "What about the pills?" Johnson, "She doesn't suspect anything. She thinks she's just sleeping well." Scarlett, "You're sure this will work?" Johnson, "Trust me, I've thought of everything." The phone slipped from my numb fingers and clattered onto the desk. Life insurance. They were talking about life insurance. My life insurance. With shaking hands, I continued reading. Johnson, "The beneficiary documentation is updated. You're listed as my business partner for the new firm we're starting." Scarlett, "And if anyone asks questions?" Johnson, "They won't. Accidental overdose. She's been having sleep problems taking medication. These things happen." Scarlett, "I'm scared." Johnson, "Don't be. By this time next month, we'll have everything we need to start over. New city, new life, new business." I stared at the screen until the words blurred together. Accidental overdose. Johnson wasn't just drugging me to sneak out at night. He was building a pattern, establishing a history of medication use that would make my death look accidental when the time came. And that time was apparently next month. I scrolled further back in their messages and found the smoking gun, screenshots of my life insurance policy. $23 million, with Johnson as the sole beneficiary. Money he planned to share with Scarlett as they started their new life together. Without me. The room spun around me. I gripped the desk to keep from falling as the full scope of their plan became clear. Johnson had been methodically preparing to murder me. The sleeping pills weren't just to keep me unconscious during his meetings with Scarlett. They were to establish a pattern of drug use that would explain my death. Everyone would assume I'd accidentally taken too many sleeping pills, a tragic mistake by a woman with chronic insomnia. No one would suspect Johnson. The grieving husband who'd loved me so much he'd started making me bedtime tea to help with my sleep problems. I thought about all the nights I had actually drunk that tea before I became suspicious. How many times had Johnson been testing dosages, seeing how much he could give me before I stopped waking up entirely? The recording device. I rushed to my jewelry box and retrieved it, then plugged it into Johnson's computer. The audio from last night was crystal clear. Johnson moving around the room, getting dressed, making phone calls. "It's Johnson," his voice said in a whisper. "She's out cold. We can move to phase 2. Are you sure she doesn't suspect anything?" Scarlett's voice was tiny through the phone speaker, but audible, positive. "The Ambien is working perfectly. She doesn't remember anything after she drinks the tea." "When do we do it?" "Next Friday. I'll increase the dosage gradually over the next week so her body gets used to more medication. Then on Friday night, I'll give her enough to make sure she doesn't wake up." "And you're sure it will look accidental?" "She's been having sleep problems for months. I've made sure everyone knows that. Her doctor, her friends, even her sister. When she accidentally takes too many sleeping pills, no one will question it." "What about the investigation?" "There won't be one. Accidental overdoses happen all the time, especially with sleep medication. The insurance company might do a routine investigation, but they won't find anything suspicious." "I'm still nervous about this, Johnson." "Don't be. By next weekend, we'll be free. Free to be together. Free to start our firm. Free from all the lies and sneaking around." The recording continued, but I'd heard enough. Next Friday. That was 6 days away. Johnson was planning to kill me in 6 days. I sat in that office for what felt like hours, listening to my husband plan my murder with his lover, the man I trusted with my life, my heart, my future. He was going to take it all away. But not if I stopped him first. I've always been a planner. It's what made me a good journalist, the ability to think through complex situations, anticipate problems, and develop strategies. Now, I was planning for my life. First, I made copies of everything: the burner phone messages, the audio recordings, and screenshots of Scarlett's social media posts. I uploaded everything to a secure cloud account and emailed copies to myself from 3 different addresses. Then, I called my lawyer. "Wendy, good to hear from you," said Patricia Reeves, the attorney who'd handled our will and estate planning. "What can I do for you?" "I need to update my life insurance policy. I want to change the beneficiary, of course." "Any particular reason for the change?" I chose my words carefully. "Just want to make sure my assets are distributed according to my current wishes." "I understand. Let me pull up your policy." She paused. "Here it is. Current beneficiary is Johnson Lopez, your husband. Who would you like to change it to?" "My sister, Rebecca Martinez. I'll email you her information." "Consider it done. The change will take effect within 24 hours. One problem solved. If Johnson killed me, he wouldn't see a penny. But I needed more than that. I needed justice next." I called Detective Ray Clark at the Chicago Police Department. Ray had been a source for several articles I'd written about local crime. And I trusted him. Clark speaking. "Ray. It's Wendy Lopez. I need your help with something." "Wendy, haven't heard from you in a while. What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "I think my husband is planning to kill me." Silence on the other end of the line. "That's a serious accusation, Wendy. What makes you think that?" I explained everything: the sleeping pills, the burner phone, the recorded conversations, the insurance policy. Ray listened without interrupting. "Jesus," he said when I finished. "Do you have all this evidence?" "Yes. Audio recordings, text messages, photos, everything." "Okay. Here's what we're going to do. Can you come to the station this afternoon? We need to document everything officially and discuss your options." "What kind of options?" "Well, we could arrest Johnson now based on conspiracy charges, but his lawyer would probably get him out on bail within hours. And depending on how good his attorney is, some of this evidence might not be admissible." My heart sank. "So, he might get away with it?" "Not necessarily. The stronger play might be to catch him in the act. If we can document him actually attempting to administer a lethal dose, we'll have attempted murder charges that will stick." "You want to use me as bait?" "Only if you're comfortable with it, and only with full police protection. We'd wire you and have officers stationed outside your house. They'd intervene before you're in any real danger." I thought about it. The idea of letting Johnson get close enough to almost kill me was terrifying, but it was also the best way to ensure he couldn't hurt anyone else. What if something goes wrong? "We won't let that happen. I promise you, Wendy, we'll be watching every second. The moment Johnson makes his move, we'll be there." "Okay," I said. "Let's do it." "Good. Come in this afternoon and we'll work out the details. Wendy, don't do anything that might tip him off. Act normal until Friday night." "Act normal." As if anything about this situation was normal. But I could do it. I'd been acting for weeks already, pretending to drink drug tea, pretending to be the loving wife of a man who wanted me dead. What were a few more days? The next few days were the longest of my life. I went through the motions of normal life while wearing a wire. Knowing that police officers were watching our house 24 hours a day. I wrote articles, had lunch with friends, and made small talk with Johnson about his work, all while knowing he was planning to eliminate me. Johnson, meanwhile, seemed more relaxed than he had in weeks. He was probably relieved that his plan was almost complete. Just a few more days of pretending to love me, and then he'd be free to start his new life with Scarlett. On Wednesday night, he made my tea with extra care. I added some honey, he said, presenting the cup with a smile. Thought you might like it sweeter. I accepted the cup and pretended to take a sip while the wire taped to my chest recorded every word. Delicious. Thank you, darling. Johnson watched me drink with satisfaction. You've been sleeping so much better lately. The tea is really helping. It really is. I don't know what I'd do without you taking such good care of me. The irony was overwhelming. Here I was, thanking my husband for poisoning me, while police officers listened to every word. That night, I poured the tea into the sink as usual and waited for Johnson to leave. Detective Clark had instructed me not to follow Johnson anymore. They had other officers handling surveillance while I stayed home and acted unconscious. On Thursday, Johnson seemed nervous. How are you feeling? He asked over breakfast. Good. Why? You just look a little tired. Maybe you should go to bed early tonight. Practice run. Johnson was probably going to test a higher dosage of sleeping pills to see how I reacted. That sounds nice. Maybe I'll even skip my usual evening activities and go straight to bed after dinner. Perfect. Johnson's smile didn't reach his eyes. That evening, the tea tasted more bitter than usual. Johnson had definitely increased the dosage. This one tastes different, I commented, setting the cup down after pretending to take a sip. Johnson's face went pale. Different how? Just stronger, I guess. More medicinal. Oh, that's because I used a different brand of chamomile. The store was out of your usual one. Another lie to add to the collection. I finished drinking the tea and went upstairs early as planned. Johnson followed me up 30 minutes later and checked to make sure I was unconscious. This time, he shook me harder and even lifted my arm to let it drop. Satisfied that I was completely unresponsive, he made a phone call. Tomorrow night, he whispered into the phone. She's ready. The higher dose worked perfectly. Tomorrow night. Friday. 24 hours until Johnson tried to kill me. Friday crawled by like a month. Johnson left for work early, claiming he had final preparations for the Hartwell presentation. I knew he was actually making final arrangements with Scarlett. Probably going over their escape plan one more time. Detective Clark called around noon. How are you holding up? Terrified, I admitted, but ready to end this. Good. Remember, we'll be monitoring everything. The moment he administers what we believe is a lethal dose, we're coming in. You'll be safe. What if he's suspicious? What if he realizes I'm not really unconscious? He won't. According to the recordings, he's tested higher doses twice this week and believes they're working. He has no reason to suspect anything. And Scarlett, we have officers watching her apartment. If she tries to leave the city, we'll arrest her as an accessory. I spent the afternoon writing letters to my sister, my parents, and my closest friends, just in case something went wrong. I wanted them to know the truth about Johnson, about our marriage, and about how the man they'd all loved and trusted had been planning to kill me. Johnson came home around 6 with flowers. Red roses, my favorite. What's the occasion? I asked, accepting the bouquet. Do I need an occasion to buy flowers for my beautiful wife? The same man who was planning to murder me in a few hours had stopped to buy me flowers. The disconnect was staggering. They're beautiful. Thank you. We had dinner together, grilled salmon with asparagus, one of Johnson's specialties. He was chattier than usual, telling stories about work, asking about my latest article, acting like the loving husband he'd pretended to be for months. I'm so lucky to have you, he said. Reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I feel the same way, I replied. And for a moment, I almost believed it. Despite everything I knew, part of me still remembered the man I'd fallen in love with in college. The man who'd sketched our dream house on napkins and promised we'd change the world together. But that man was gone. Maybe he'd never existed in the first place. At 11:30, Johnson appeared with my tea. The cup seemed fuller than usual, and the liquid was darker. Here you go, sweetheart. I made it extra strong. I know you've been having trouble sleeping lately. Trouble sleeping because of the drugs you've been giving me, I thought but didn't say, thank you. I raised the cup to my lips. The wire under my shirt felt hot against my skin. Somewhere outside, police officers were listening to every word, waiting for Johnson to make his move. I pretended to drink the tea, making satisfied sounds as the level in the cup went down. Johnson watched intently, more focused than he'd ever been during this nightly routine. How does it taste tonight? Good. Maybe a little stronger than usual, but good. Johnson nodded, satisfied. The stronger blend should help you sleep more deeply. Sleep more deeply forever. I continued my performance, gradually letting my eyelids grow heavy as I finished the tea. The cup was actually filled with water I'd secretly substituted. But Johnson didn't know that. I'm feeling drowsy already, I said, stretching and yawning. Good. Why don't you head up to bed? I'll be up soon. Just need to check some emails. Check some emails. More like make final coordination calls with his accomplice. I trudged upstairs, every step feeling like walking to my own execution. Even though I knew the police were watching, even though the tea had been harmless water, the reality of what Johnson intended to do tonight made my skin crawl. I in our bedroom. I changed into pajamas and got under the covers. The recording device was still hidden in my jewelry box, and the wire under my pajama top would capture everything. I lay in the dark, controlling my breathing, waiting. 45 minutes later, Johnson crept into the room. Wendy, he whispered. I didn't respond. He approached the bed and shook my shoulder gently, then more forcefully. When I remained limp, he lifted my arm and let it drop. Satisfied, Johnson went to his dresser and opened the bottom drawer. I heard rustling, then the sound of something being unwrapped. Through barely opened eyes, I watched him approach the bed carrying a syringe. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the moment Johnson would try to kill me. I'm sorry, Wendy, he whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. But this is the only way Scarlett and I can be together. The only way we can have the life we deserve. He thought I couldn't hear him confessing. Thought I was unconscious and helpless. Johnson found a vein in my arm and positioned the needle. Sleep well, my love. Forever. Just as the needle pierced my skin, the bedroom door exploded open. Chicago police. Drop the weapon. Detective Clark and 3 uniformed officers flooded the room with guns drawn. Johnson jumped back, dropping the syringe, which clattered to the floor. What the hell? Johnson started, but Clark cut him off. Johnson Lopez, you're under arrest for attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. Johnson's face went through a dozen expressions: shock, confusion, fear, and finally, rage as he looked down at me sitting up in bed. You were awake, he said, his voice filled with betrayal. You were awake the whole time. For weeks, I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I know about Scarlett. I know about the insurance money. I know about everything. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You wanted me dead so you could start a new life with your girlfriend, using my life insurance money. Johnson lunged toward me, but the officers were ready. They tackled him to the ground and cuffed his hands behind his back. You ruined everything. He screamed as they hauled him to his feet. We could have been happy. You could have been divorced, I said. But you chose murder instead. As the police led Johnson away, Detective Clark knelt beside the bed and carefully picked up the syringe with gloved hands. Are you okay? He asked. I touched the tiny puncture wound on my arm where the needle had broken the skin. Did he? Did any of it get into my system? We'll get you to the hospital to be checked, but I don't think so. We stopped him before he could inject anything. What was in the syringe? Clark's face was grim. Concentrated insulin. Enough to send you into fatal hypoglycemic shock within minutes. It would have looked like a diabetic emergency. Hard to detect in an autopsy, especially if the examiner wasn't looking for it specifically. Johnson had done his research. If the police hadn't intervened, I would have died appearing to suffer from a sudden diabetic episode. Except I wasn't diabetic. It would have been written off as an undiagnosed condition that manifested fatally. What happens now? We arrest Scarlett as an accessory. With your recordings and the evidence we collected tonight, they're both looking at attempted murder charges. Johnson won't see the outside of a prison cell for decades. As paramedics checked me over and Detective Clark explained the next steps, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that it was over, anger at the betrayal, grief for the marriage that had been built on lies. But mostly, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: freedom. The trial was a media sensation. Architect planned wife's murder for insurance money, screamed the headlines. Husband's deadly tea time ritual and sleeping beauty betrayal dominated the news cycle for weeks. I testified for 3 days, telling the jury about the months of deception, the drug tea, the elaborate murder plot. The prosecutor played the audio recordings of Johnson and Scarlett planning my death. And there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Johnson's defense attorney tried to paint me as a paranoid wife who had entrapped her innocent husband. But the evidence was overwhelming: the burner phone, the syringe filled with insulin, the detailed planning captured, and dozens of text messages. Scarlett broke first. Faced with the possibility of life in prison, she agreed to testify against Johnson in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony revealed the full scope of their plan. They had met 6 months earlier when Scarlett was hired to design the interior of one of Johnson's commercial projects, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The affair started immediately, but it quickly became about more than just sex and romance. Johnson told me his wife had a large life insurance policy. And you agreed to help him murder Mrs. Lopez? The prosecutor asked. At first, I thought he was just fantasizing, but then he started researching different methods, different ways to make it look accidental. He became obsessed. When did you realize he was serious? When he bought the insulin, he told me it was foolproof, that it would look like she'd developed sudden diabetes and died from hypoglycemic shock. He'd been giving her sleeping pills for weeks to establish a pattern of medication use, making it seem like she had health problems. Johnson sat at the defendant's table, his face a mask of rage and betrayal. The man I'd loved for 12 years looked like a stranger. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and a dozen other charges. Johnson was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Scarlett received 10 years for conspiracy and accessory charges. As the judge read the sentence, Johnson finally looked at me. I loved you, he mouthed silently, but love doesn't drug your partner's tea. Love doesn't plan your death for insurance money. Love doesn't involve syringes filled with insulin in the middle of the night. Whatever Johnson had felt for me, it wasn't love. It was possession, control, and ultimately greed. The house felt different after Johnson was gone. I'd considered selling it and moving somewhere else, starting completely over. But this was my home too. I'd lived here for 8 years, planted the garden, chosen the paint colors, and made memories in every room. Why should I be the one to leave? Instead, I reclaimed it. I threw out the chamomile tea in every cup Johnson had ever used to serve it to me. I changed the locks, repainted the bedroom, and bought new furniture. I turned Johnson's home office into a writing room where I could work on the book I decided to write about my experience, sleeping with the enemy. How I Survived My Husband's Murder plot became a bestseller within 3 months of publication. The advance alone was more than I'd made in 5 years of freelance writing. But more importantly, the book helped other women who found themselves in similar situations. I received hundreds of letters from readers who recognized the signs of manipulation and control in their own relationships. Your story saved my life, wrote a woman from Denver. My husband had started making me special smoothies every morning, and I was getting drowsy and disoriented during the day. After reading your book, I had them tested. Rohypnol. Stories like that made everything I'd been through worthwhile. I also returned to investigative journalism, using my experience to write about domestic violence, financial abuse, and the warning signs of relationships built on deception. Major magazines started calling, offering assignments I'd only dreamed about during my years writing restaurant reviews. 6 months after the trial, I was contacted by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell my story. The resulting film, The Perfect Husband, won several awards and sparked national conversations about intimate partner violence and murder-for-profit schemes, but the most satisfying moment came a year later when I received an unexpected visitor. I was working in my garden on a sunny Saturday morning when a car pulled into my driveway. A young woman got out, petite, blonde, probably in her early 20s. "Are you Wendy Lopez?" she asked hesitantly. "Yes. Can I help you? My name is Emma Lewis. I think my boyfriend is trying to kill me." I set down my gardening gloves and really looked at her. Emma was thin, almost gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes and a nervous energy that reminded me of myself during those terrible weeks when I'd first become suspicious of Johnson. "Why don't you come inside?" I said. "Let's talk." Emma's story was different from mine, but eerily similar in its patterns. Her boyfriend had started making her special protein shakes to help with her fitness goals. She'd been getting increasingly tired and disoriented. Money had gone missing from her bank account. She'd found searches for life insurance information on his computer. "I read your book," she said, tears streaming down her face. "And I realized that everything you described, the gradual isolation, the concerned trolling, the way he made me feel like I was going crazy, it's all happening to me." We spent the afternoon planning her escape. I connected her with Detective Clark, who had become something of a specialist in these cases after Johnson's trial. Within a week, Emma was safely away from her boyfriend and living with relatives in another state. Her boyfriend was arrested 2 days later when he tried to collect on an insurance policy he'd secretly taken out in Emma's name. Emma's protein shakes had been laced with a slow-acting poison that would have eventually caused organ failure. She would have died if she hadn't read my story and recognized the warning signs. It's been 3 years since that night when Johnson tried to kill me with a syringe full of insulin. I'm sitting in my writing room now, looking out at the garden I've spent months renovating, where Johnson used to plant boring, symmetrical flowers. I've created wild, chaotic beauty. Sunflowers, roses, and jasmine climbing up trellises I built myself. People often ask me if I'll ever trust again, if I'll ever remarry. The honest answer is that I don't know. Johnson wasn't a monster when I met him. He was charming, intelligent, seemingly devoted. If someone could pretend to love me for 12 years while planning my murder, how could I trust my judgment about anyone else? But I've learned that love isn't about trust, not entirely. Real love is about respect, about honoring someone's autonomy, even when it's inconvenient for you. It's about wanting their happiness, even when it conflicts with your own desires. Johnson never loved me. He loved the idea of me, the way I made him look, the life we'd built together. But when that life no longer served his purposes, he was willing to discard me like an outdated piece of furniture. That's not love. That's ownership. True love would have meant Johnson asking for a divorce when he fell for Scarlett. It would have meant honest conversations about what wasn't working in our marriage. It would have meant treating me like a human being with my own rights and agency. Instead, he chose deception, control, and ultimately attempted murder. But here's what Johnson didn't count on: I'm stronger than he ever gave me credit for. I survived his sleeping pills, his lies, his betrayal, and his attempt on my life. I rebuilt my career, reclaimed my home, and found my voice as a writer and advocate. Most importantly, I learned that I don't need someone else to complete me. I'm already whole. The other day, I was at a coffee shop working on my second book when a man at the next table struck up a conversation. He was handsome, charming, interested in my work. Under different circumstances, I might have been flattered by his attention. Instead, I found myself analyzing everything he said, looking for inconsistencies, watching for the subtle signs of manipulation I'd learned to recognize. Maybe that's paranoid. Maybe not every charming man is a potential killer, but I'd rather be alive and paranoid than dead and trusting. As I finish writing this story, I can hear Johnson's voice in my head one last time. I loved you. No, Johnson, you didn't. But that's okay, because I love me enough for both of us, and that's more than enough.